Here at Amazon, April is Neurodiversity Celebration Month. It is an opportunity to raise awareness about neurodiversity, a lifelong developmental disability that affects how some people communicate and interact with the world. It is an opportunity to promote acceptance of neurodivergent people and a call to action for allies to work more to include the neurodivergent community in society and in the workplace. In recognition of Neurodiversity Celebration Month, I'm joined today by James Greenfield, AWS VP and executive sponsor for Neurodiversity, and Natasha McCann, Inclusion Ambassador and a member of the neurodivergent community. Today, we're going to tackle talking about the importance of neurodiversity and ways to support the community. My name is LaDavia Drain. I lead AWS Inclusion, Diversity, and Equity, and I'll be your moderator today. Natasha, James, are we ready to kick off?
Yes, definitely.
Yeah.
Awesome. So I'm going to start with James. James, please tell me, what does neurodiversity mean to you? Why is this work important to you?
So neurodiversity is very important to me because my son was diagnosed with Asperger's when he was much younger, and so since then it's been kind of this constant looking at him and trying to think about how we create a world that is going to accept him and give him the opportunity to realize the potential that we see in him. So it's this very close at hand, day to day thing that we're exposed to, and it's really forced me and my wife to look at the world differently and kind of see it through his eyes.
Very good. Thank you for sharing, James. And Natasha, how about you? Why is this work important to you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm neurodiverse myself. I was diagnosed when I was very young. So I was diagnosed when I was 13. 29 now, currently going through the diagnostics for another kind of neurodiverse condition. So that's interesting, kind of going through that at the moment, and kind of really, I've lived with it kind of all of my life. Obviously, I only found out when I was 13, but it's been with me really from the beginning, gone into my career, and in ways, kind of it's a positive thing. It's really helped me in my career, but it also comes with a lot of kind of not so great stuff. So yeah, kind of really glad to be here today and feeling really thankful to have this conversation today as well.
Awesome. Natasha, talk to us about what challenges you faced at work being neurodivergent, but you also mentioned that there are positive parts of it. So talk to us about both.
Yeah, so the world that we live in, kind of as it is now, unfortunately, it's not built for neurodiverse people. And as a young person, especially when I first got my diagnosis, the world in general felt very overwhelming to me. For example, even going into a supermarket and all of the lights overhead, all of the people was overstimulating, and it still is. Kind of in terms of work, I remember before the pandemic when this was before I joined AWS actually, I used to be in the office 5 days a week. I used to come home with migraines. I felt really tired, even after being in for a few hours, and I never really knew why that was. So I realised my brain couldn't really cope properly with all the external stimuli. Open plan offices can be very stressful to a neurodivergent person. It's being able to filter out background noise whilst sometimes your brain is running at 100 miles per hour trying to focus. And being able to have that flexibility to work from home now and only having to go in a few days a week, it's much more accessible to me. In terms of the positives, kind of from my perspective, I've really kind of picked up on especially as I've got older, because I always used to think of neurodiversity as quite a negative thing for me. But as I've kind of matured, I've kind of realised I have a lot of superpowers and a lot of strengths that I can also bring to work. So for me, it's having that attention to detail. I can often pick up on things others cannot, and people often say to me, well, how did you do that so quickly? It's just the way my brain works. Empathy is another big one. Before AWS, I used to work in the emergency services and could immediately tell and pick up as soon as I walked into a room. I could quite quickly pick up on people's emotions to help someone, kind of like people that are close to me call it a sixth sense, but it's also how my brain works and interprets things. Special interest also, I can really dive deep into certain subjects. My one in the tech world, I'm a solutions architect, is data and analytics. With the data part, I've been really lucky to be able to travel to different places, different conferences, and kind of present on things. So public speaking was something I used to be really scared of a few years ago, and kind of never would I have imagined I'd push myself to get onto a 14-hour flight to Singapore. And that's something I did last year. So being able to push myself out of my comfort zone is another big one for me as well.
Very good. That is very helpful. I think that just the way that you've described it, and you just made it very realistic for those of us that are managers, to really, just understand how it is that the things that are very helpful to you and the things that aren't, and how you perceive those things. So, thank you for sharing that, Natasha. James, I'm going to turn to you now. Data shows us that 1 out of 5 people are neurodivergent. Given this reality, how should we work to create environments that support and develop our neurodivergent builders to make sure that they can live out their full potential at work?
So I mean, I think there's there's kind of an underlying maxim that that we've sort of settled on, because I have 2 children. I have 2 sons. One has Asperger's, as I mentioned, and the other one, as far as we can tell, is neurotypical. Like, we're constantly having this, like, is there some ADHD there? Because that's kind of rife throughout our families, to be honest. And it's something we always come back to, which I think applies equally, to our teams, is nothing that you do to help create an accepting, positive environment for somebody who's neurodivergent will ever hurt somebody who isn't. And so, as a general rule, I try to apply those things very broadly, rather than thinking about how do I help somebody in my team, or a peer who may be neurodivergent, set them up for success. I try to think about it in terms of what can I do to create a more inclusive, accepting, safe environment for everybody. And so, big focus in my teams. I happen to be working with a fantastic inclusion partner, is to create psychological safety for our teams, and to really think about what that looks like in practice, and that will help everybody. And then, sort of more specifically, think about my own son, and applying this, more broadly. He processes information very slowly, and so, pretty common challenge in the mornings is giving him an instruction, as part of getting ready for school. And if you don't kind of pause and give him the space to process that, then he gets frustrated, because he feels like he's getting hounded to do something, and he's heard you and he's working on it. It's just, it's going to take a little bit longer. And so, so I try to apply that day to day as well. And something that has always been pretty core to me, that I think is particularly applicable here, and I try to encourage the people that I work with, folks in my teams, to recognize this, which is, if you take my son as an example again, if somebody's, not doing something as quickly as you'd expect them to, or want them to, or in a way that you want them to, then I try to encourage people to assume that you're missing a piece of the picture, and that there may be more going on behind the scenes, and maybe it's that somebody processes information more slowly. Maybe it's just that they're having a bad day. But just reminding yourself that maybe you don't have the full picture, and being open to learning that there is more to the picture than you have, I think is a huge part of creating that environment that will help everybody, but in particular neurodiverse people in our teams, be successful.
James, it sounds like you're an incredibly inclusive leader. Do you think that you would be as inclusive of a leader if you did not have a son who was neurodivergent?
I mean, I think I would. I'd certainly love to believe that I would. But I do think, so what's interesting for me is, a number of the things that I've always principles that I've always operated according to, have come into sharp relief with my son's diagnosis. And so it's kind of sharpened the pencil on a set of things that I try to do more generally. But it's made them much clearer to me. It's given me better language to talk about them. It's helped crystallize some things that I kind of knew intuitively, but now I have a whole lot of research and evidence to back up, and terminology, language to use, things like that. So I don't think it's that having a close family member being diagnosed has turned me into a fundamentally different leader, so much as it has added another level of sort of refined detail to the picture.
So there's something about your lived experience that has kind of refined, or as you said,
Yes,
kind of
definitely,
sharpened those skills.
definitely.
I love that. Something that you said that I'm going to take with me and that I encourage leaders to take with them is whatever you put in place for your team, even though you may be doing it specifically for someone that's neurodivergent, what you're saying is the one thing you know for sure is it's not going to hurt others. Like it's only going to help the environment that
Exactly.
you're trying to create. I think that that's such a great lesson. So thank you for that. Natasha, I'll give you the opportunity to answer this question as well. Can you talk a little bit about creating environments to support and develop our neurodivergent builders? Just wondering if you have an opinion on this question as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think psychological safety, I think James has already mentioned that, is a big one for me. So I actually never revealed to anyone in a work environment that I was neurodivergent till I joined AWS. I don't know what changed, but I think something just clicked in my head. I think it was the first time in any workplace that I felt truly safe around people that I felt kind of understood me as a person, was on the kind of same wavelength, as it were, kind of as me. So really being able to foster this culture of leading with empathy in your teams, I think this, in my honest opinion, is key to bringing out people's strengths and earning people's trust as well, especially if they're neurodiverse. So just some examples I've seen kind of with this, and something my manager does as well, is beginning a conversation of empathy. For example, starting off with someone is struggling with something, start off with, help me understand, what are you struggling with, tell me more about kind of what you're struggling with at the moment and what's important about this subject to you. And also being kind, which I think is the most important one, especially to me. Like, send a Slack message of support when a team member is having a hard time, and kind of during periods of sudden change, check in with your colleagues' direct reports during periods of high stress. Honestly, when someone sends me a message and says, "Oh, Tash, like I've seen you're kind of being a little bit more quiet today. Is there anything that I can do to help? Is there anything that I can do to help?" Basically, just that simple message of kindness honestly means the world to me. Another thing that I've tried to share both with colleagues and my managers is this framework that I actually came across on LinkedIn. So I think it was something that was shared by someone called Ellie Middleton, who's a basically neurodiversity influencer slash activist on LinkedIn. I follow her and she's fantastic. And she kind of shared about this framework called the What by When framework. So when you're kind of asking someone for something, start off with defining three things. So one, what exactly do you need from me? When do you need those things by? And my favourite one, and the one that I always kind of try and get people to include, is why do you need that from me? If someone asks me to do something and doesn't say why, that can cause me a great deal of anxiety. So just doing kind of simple things like that, and also things that will probably help neurotypical people as well, I think are really, really important.
Really good actionable advice, Natasha. Just some of the phrases I just want to restate that you've said, phrases that managers can use to begin a conversation with empathy. Help me understand, tell me more, and what's important about. And also you talked about being kind, sending Slack messages or chime messages to a team member that's having a hard time, checking in on your colleagues and your direct reports, especially during periods of high stress. Just want to restate those because I think that those are tools, kind of what James said earlier, we could always use, right? No matter who it is that we're working with, but in particular to make sure that we support our neurodiverse builders. So thank you for that. I'm going to jump to the next question. And James, I'd like to start with you. Can you just talk specifically about actions that you've taken to drive neurodiversity acceptance and understanding in your business in particular, James? And then if you could also just talk about maybe examples across the organization where you've seen other leaders take approaches that you would recommend as well.
Yeah. So I've talked about working explicitly to try to create more psychological safety. I think that underpins anything that we're going to do, that creates an environment that sets everybody up for success. And I love the framework that Natasha just shared. I think that's a perfect example of something which, if you did that with everybody that you worked with, everybody would be better. Like, communication would be clearer. Everybody would know what they're doing. So I think that was an awesome example. I think I think on the the specific talents and things that you may see, that somebody's neurodiverse is good at. The one thing that I would say there is, it's very easy to kind of fall into this trap of assuming everybody's the same. And just like neurotypical and neurodiverse represents a range of big differences within either of those groups. So within the neurodiverse community, you're going to see wild differences. And some of the things that Natasha talked about describing herself, I see some of those in my son, and there's some there where my son is the polar opposite. So be aware that there are going to be big differences. And don't assume that everybody's the same. And so, talking about my son, some of the things that I see in him, when he's excited about something, he is laser focused. When he's not, it's much harder to get him to focus. And so learning, if you're thinking about your team, learning about the things that they are excited about, is really important and really valuable, because then you can make sure that those are the things that that they're working on, and then you get to benefit from that laser focus. And that's something that I think a lot of people don't really understand ADHD, for example. But if you are excited about something, like, you're so focused, it's incredible, and that becomes a superpower. So find ways to leverage that superpower. The other one is, my son looks at the world in a completely different way. The things he notices, the observations he comes up with, the things that he connects, they're never the things that we expect. And I think that is a huge source of creativity. And if you could find a way to sort of tap the full potential of that creativity across an entire team, then you've got a leg up when it comes to problem solving, those kinds of things. So that's something else. And then the other one is, we often, I talk about my son having a flat probability map. Everything in the world is equally likely. We'll be walking down the street, and it's just as likely that the thing that he sees in the distance that he can't make out is a dog or a dinosaur. Could be either. Which can be funny sometimes, but what it does mean is he brings no assumptions to a situation, and so when he comes in, he is going to be that fresh perspective. And again, if you could find a way to spot that in your teams and tap into that could be super valuable. So there are a wide range of differences in different contexts. We tend to think about them as challenges, but they can also be these enormous superpowers. But at the core of it is getting to know the individuals in your teams and understand what their strengths are, and where those superpowers come into play. And then and that, ultimately, that's what diversity is about. It's about taking advantage of the fact that a team consists of a group of people who are strong in a bunch of areas and maybe challenged in a bunch of areas, and those areas don't overlap. And then trying to take advantage of the sort of the sum being greater than the individual parts.
There's so much richness, James, in what you just provided for us, the information you just provided. Something that really surfaced for me is this concept of equity. So what you're saying is, we need to, as leaders, we should meet our people, meet our builders where they are, right? As opposed to providing the same thing for all. Let's be very specific and meet people where they are. And to lean into superpowers, which, as you said earlier, no matter the audience, no matter the person, you should lean into superpowers. And you talked a bit about being creative. I mean, as opposed to boxing someone in, even challenging myself, right? Challenging ourselves as leaders to expand our own creativity, right? So that we can come along, which it's really something that I'm going to think a lot about. Maybe I'm not being creative enough when I'm challenging others to think about how they're going to solve a problem, and so thank you for that. I'm going to have to replay this for myself, and take some good notes and apply them. Awesome.
Pleasure.
Awesome. Natasha, I'm going to ask you a question specifically around women and underrepresented groups. Can you talk a bit about intersectionality and how women and underrepresented groups may be impacted who are neurodiverse?
Yeah, so interestingly, when I was doing some, I guess, research before the session, I came across this statistic. I live in the UK, so this might be different in the US, but people that identify as male are 4 times more likely to be diagnosed as neurodiverse compared to people that identify as women. So the difference between neurodiversity in women compared to men, and also non-binary folk, is that it can be subtle and less noticeable, which can then lead to later diagnosis because you just don't pick it up. And we also cannot move past the point that men and women plus non-binary folk will experience neurodiversity in different ways, like kind of James mentioned earlier. And kind of a saying that stays with me is, if you've met one person that's neurodiverse, you've met one person that's neurodiverse. Every neurodiverse person is completely different. Same with neurotypical people. And there's also gendered expectations of behaviour, especially in the workplace. So in recent years, there's been a lot of increased attention on, for example, ADHD and how that manifests itself and is diagnosed based on kind of how someone identifies. For example, being more hyperactive or impulsive or more introverted if you identify with a specific gender or identity, meaning underrepresented groups then often get overlooked at diagnosis. Then this has a resounding impact on someone's mental health and also work as a result. So I think it's really important to consider kind of people with different identities will experience it in completely different ways, just like James mentioned as well earlier.
You said something that I just want to repeat. If you've met one person that is neurodiverse, you've met one person that is neurodiverse. I think that it's
Yeah.
important for us to just really make sure that folks hear that. And then also, I think we could do a full hour just on gender expectations in the workplace, and how that intersects with neurodiversity. So just promise me that we'll be able to continue this conversation at another time, because there's just so much to unpack there, I think.
Absolutely. We're more than happy to do that.
Okay. James, I feel like you've given some examples, but I'm going to go ahead and tee this question up anyway. Give us some examples of talents, competencies possessed by neurodivergent people that make them valuable contributors here at Amazon and AWS.
Sure. I mean, I think I think the one that most people are familiar with is that sort of hyperfocus. And that's that's something that's a superpower in lots of contexts. Natasha talked about data analysis. Who hasn't been lost in a sea of data? Trying to figure out like what the salient points are to focus on or take away. Another one is you often see this kind of aggregate information processing, where it's almost like you step back. I think of it as stepping back and defocusing your eyes, and the answer kind of falls out, and you can't really explain where it came from. I see that in how my son tackles his math homework. He gets to the answer, and it's never really clear how he did. And then when you work with him to kind of back out into it, the way that he got there is often very different to how I would have got there. But he's kind of got this ability to kind of step back and sort of almost see the answer. So and that's incredibly powerful when you're trying to sort of tease patterns out of very large or convoluted or ambiguous data sets or situations. That's another example of one. And then I really, I mentioned it earlier. I really, I don't think you can overstress coming at things with either no assumptions or a completely different set of assumptions, and what that that teases out, and that's something that we actively we actively try to do within our teams across Amazon, where we try and disconfirm our beliefs and go and look for diverse perspectives, because you want those, because that's how you kind of see problems from a new angle. That's how you avoid kind of missing things that you might otherwise not see. Those are some examples of areas where, and even thinking beyond my son, I've worked with some folks, over the years who are, neurodivergent, where I've seen those superpowers come to bear. And it kind of comes back to what I was saying earlier about, I've always been a big believer in sort of fitting the problem and the person together. Find the thing that somebody's really excited about or enthusiastic about, that plays to their strengths, and try to sort of pair that up. And this is a special case of that more general principle. Find the problem that plays to the superpower, in an individual, whether they're neurodivergent or not, and then try to pair them up. And often you see amazing results.
Wow. James, I have to tell you what this has me thinking about is how we have data that shows us that employees tend to look for managers, look for leaders who look like them, think like them, come from the same places they do, right? There's just something about being on a team where someone can see you. And it sounds like I wouldn't be surprised if that's the feedback that team members would give you. This is someone that I feel very comfortable with. I have that psychological safety, and it sounds like it has a lot to do with the experience that you've had with your son, but then also bringing that full circle, and leveraging that with your team members, being able to probably very quickly realize, I know that. I know that superpower. I'm going to lean in there, and I'm going to put team members together that have a synergy, just based on your own experience. So just calling that out, as such a value add as a leader. Natasha, would you like to add anything to this question?
Yeah, so I think for me, I guess it aligns to one of the Amazon leadership principles as well. It's being able to dive deep into those specific topics. Like for me, kind of as I've already said, it's data and analytics. And I'd never had any experience of this before I joined AWS. I was a software developer, so I used to work on the web and do coding, but had never really delved into data before until I joined AWS, did my onboarding projects. And then I just got so passionate about it. And since then, like I've just been given the most amazing opportunities. So being able to go to the Singapore summit, for example, to talk about data, to hundreds of people, being able to go to Las Vegas for reInvent, being able to go to Seattle. I love to travel as well. So that's a really, really big passion of mine. And just being able to go to these different places, experience different cultures, and speak about something I love so much was, I think, like James said, it's a superpower being able to dive deep into these things, because then you get wonderful opportunities like that.
Very good. Well, our time is actually coming to an end. So I want to ask one more question, and please feel free to add anything in addition as you answer. James, we'll start with you. Leave us with some advice. What advice would you recommend fellow Amazonians take to be more aware of and better support of our neurodivergent colleagues and communities?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say two things, and they're both fundamentally about educating yourself, because I think there is a lot of misunderstanding, sort of misinformation. The one is, there are some really, really great books written by folks who are neurodivergent that kind of tells you about the world as they experience it. And I would encourage folks to go and find those, and you may read the first one and it may not resonate for you, but you'll find one. There's enough out there. I always encourage people to do that. And then the other one is, go and talk to folks who have experience of this, and that might be somebody like me who has spent the last 10 years learning all of these things, because it's part of the journey with my son. It may be somebody like Natasha who is experiencing this. And just be curious, ask some questions, learn, because I think that's always going to be step one towards creating a more inclusive environment. It's just learning, what somebody else's lived experience might be.
Thank you, James. Natasha, what advice would you recommend for fellow Amazonians to take a more aware and better supportive approach to our neurodivergent colleagues and communities?
Yeah, absolutely. So, +1 to James's point on taking the time to educate yourself on neurodiversity, because neurodiversity is invisible, you cannot see it. There have been colleagues that I've worked with in the past who are neurodiverse and I didn't even know. They may not want to tell you, they might kind of not feel comfortable in speaking about it openly. And I do a lot of kind of awareness sessions for teams. And when a fellow Amazonian approaches me from time to time and asks me or says they've watched this program about neurodiversity or they've read a little bit about it, it honestly means the absolute world to me. And simply doing a little bit of research and making the effort to understand is so important, especially to me and all of the neurodiverse community out there. And the very last one is be ready and willing to accommodate. For example, some kind of accommodations in the office that have helped me, noise cancelling headphones can be a way of filtering out background noise. So I used to have these massive Bose headphones that I used to wear when I was coding, and it really used to help me focus. Another one is wearing kind of baseball caps or hats, which protect us from feeling overstimulated by things like bright lighting in offices, kind of preventing things like kind of getting migraines, which I used to get a lot in the office. And wearing a hat in the office isn't seen as a norm, but I think it's really, really important to accommodate people kind of based on kind of how they feel comfortable and safe as well.
I got to tell you, this session with you all has been incredibly helpful for me as a leader, for me as a manager, for me as a person, on how to just lean in, educate myself, and to do that, yes, to support neurodivergent team members and colleagues. But I'm going to remember this, James. There's nothing that we can do to support one community that likely won't help another community or all of us. And I think that that's so important to take away. James, thank you for being our executive sponsor for this work and always being willing to lean in and show up. And Natasha, thank you for allowing us to go on this journey with you and to learn more about you and how we can be more supportive of our colleagues that are neurodiverse. So with that, I'm going to close this session and just thank you, and please come back. Let's have more of a conversation. We should continue these conversations so that we can equip our leaders and our team members as best as possible so we can support our neurodivergent community. Thank you both for your time.
Thank you for having us.